You noticed the room got quieter after they told their version of you. People stopped asking what really happened and started studying you like you were already guilty. The messages became shorter. The warmth disappeared from voices that once called you family. Some people did not confront you because confrontation would have required them to hear the truth, and the truth would have ruined the story they had already decided to believe. You were not just hurt by what was said, you were hurt by how quickly they accepted it. And somewhere in that silent collapse, while your name was being passed around in rooms you were not allowed to enter, God was watching the hands that tried to bury you. He saw the careful omissions, the altered timelines, the soft lies wrapped in concern, the people who acted wounded while holding the knife. You thought you were being hidden because shame had covered you. But there is a kind of hiding that is not punishment. There is a kind of silence that is not defeat. Sometimes God lets the dirt fall over a chosen person, not because the grave is the end, but because seeds only break open underground. What they called your disappearance was preparation. What they called your weakness was restraint. What they mistook for guilt was obedience under pressure. You wanted to defend yourself until your chest burned, but something deeper kept pulling you back, telling you not every accusation deserves your breath, not every crowd deserves your evidence, not every person who demands an explanation is capable of handling the truth. This season has not been random. The isolation, the betrayal, the strange timing, the way people revealed themselves when you had nothing left to offer them, all of it has been part of a separating work. God did not need the crowd to approve you before he began protecting you. He did not need their version to fall apart before he knew who you were. And now, slowly, without you forcing it, the ground is shifting. Details are returning. Patterns are showing. The people who tried to make you look unstable are exposing the instability in themselves. The ones who buried your name did not understand that God keeps records in places human hands cannot reach. At first, you may have believed the worst part was the injustice itself, but the deeper wound was the loneliness that followed it. It is one thing to be lied on by someone who never loved you well. It is another thing to watch people who knew your character suddenly act unsure. That kind of betrayal makes you question your own discernment. You start replaying conversations at night, asking whether you missed a sign, whether your kindness made you careless, whether your patience became permission for people to twist you. And the enemy uses that moment with precision. He does not only attack your reputation, he tries to make you distrust the very tenderness God placed in you. He whispers that you should become colder, more suspicious, less available, more like the people who harmed you. But this is where the hidden battle begins. The real spiritual warfare was never only about what they said, it was about whether pain could turn your heart into a weapon. God allowed you to see how quickly human loyalty can bend under pressure, not so you would hate people, but so you would stop building your identity on their consistency. Some people were not strong enough to stand with you, because standing with you would have cost them comfort, access, or acceptance. That does not make you superior to them, but it does reveal why God could not let them stay close in the same way. When truth is being refined, every false support must eventually crack. You may have thought their distance meant you were abandoned, but in the spirit, distance was also protection. There were conversations you were spared from, alliances you were removed from, rooms where your absence kept you from absorbing more poison. You were not losing everyone. You were losing the illusion that everyone near you was assigned to you. That is painful, but it is mercy with a sharp edge. The chosen path is not about being more important than others. It is about being accountable to God in places where no one claps, no one understands, and no one comes to correct the record quickly. You were not asked to become dramatic. You were asked to remain clean while the accusation tried to make you bitter. The strange thing about being falsely buried is that you learn who needs noise to survive and who has learned to stand in silence. The people who worked against you may have moved fast because they were afraid of stillness. They needed constant explanation, constant sympathy, constant control of the room, because if everything became quiet long enough, the details would begin speaking for themselves. You, on the other hand, were forced into a quieter kind of strength. You had to wake up, go to work, pray with a tight throat, answer ordinary questions, pay bills, make meals, and continue living while a false image of you walked around in other people's minds. That is a level of endurance few people recognize because it is not theatrical. It looks like simply getting through the day. It looks like choosing not to post the proof. It looks like not sending the message you drafted 3 times. It looks like letting your phone sit face down because your spirit cannot survive another argument disguised as clarification. If that kind of restraint has cost you more than anyone knows, you can like this in a quiet way, almost like placing a small stone on the altar of what God helped you survive. There is nothing weak about not reacting when reaction would only feed the hands that tried to trap you. Scripture says Jesus did not answer every accusation thrown at him, and that silence was not confusion. It was authority under surrender. There is a difference between being speechless and being submitted. You were not silent because you had nothing to say. You were silent because God was teaching you that the timing can carry more power than volume. The false story had to travel far enough for the right hearts to notice its inconsistencies. The people who spread it had to become comfortable enough to reveal their methods. The ones pretending to be concerned had to repeat themselves until their concern began sounding like obsession. This is why patience was required. Not because God ignored your pain, but because premature vindication can leave hidden roots alive. God does not only expose the fruit of deception, he exposes the root system that fed it. There is a scene you know too well, even if it happened in different forms. You walked into a room and felt the atmosphere change before anyone said a word. Someone smiled too late. Someone avoided your eyes. Someone over-explained their kindness as if kindness had suddenly become a costume. You sat there, measuring your breathing, trying not to appear affected, while your spirit knew something had been said before you arrived. That moment can make even a strong person feel small. It can make you want to shrink, perform innocence, soften your voice, become extra agreeable just to prove you are not the monster they painted. But God was watching that room differently. He was not measuring your worth by their suspicion. He was measuring the condition of each heart by how it responded to a story it had not verified. Some people failed that test quietly. They did not attack you directly, but they entertained enough poison to become unsafe. Others surprised you. Maybe not loudly, maybe not perfectly, but they paused before believing the worst. They asked questions. They noticed what did not add up. They remembered your fruit when your name was under fire. That matters. Not everyone who was silent was wicked, and not everyone who defended you publicly was pure. This is where discernment must become sharper than emotion. Pain wants to divide the world into enemies and rescuers, but God often shows a more complicated truth. Some people were deceived and later convicted. Some were intimidated and did not know how to stand. Some were jealous and found the accusation convenient. Some were loyal only when loyalty was easy. Your task is not to sort all of them with human revenge in your heart. Your task is to let God show you who can be trusted with the next version of your life. Vindication does not mean giving everyone the same access again once the truth comes out. Forgiveness can be real while boundaries remain firm. A person can be forgiven without being restored to the inner room. Jesus forgave, but he did not entrust himself to everyone because he knew what was in man. That is not bitterness. That is wisdom that has survived fire. The people who tried to bury you misunderstood one thing. God does not need a clean stage to raise someone. He has a way of using the very place of humiliation as the place of revelation. Joseph was not recognized in the pit, and he was not understood in prison, but neither location had the authority to cancel what God had placed inside him. The pit exposed his brothers. The prison refined his gift. The delay positioned his purpose. That pattern is not a fairy tale. It is a spiritual principle that still hurts when you are living through it. God may allow a chosen person to be misread for a season, because misreading reveals the reader. When people had incomplete information about you, What they did with that information exposed their appetite. Did they seek truth or did they enjoy scandal? Did they pray or did they perform concern? Did they come to you or did they collect agreement from others? These are not small things. False accusation is not only an attack on the accused, it is a mirror held up to the community around them. And now that mirror is beginning to reflect what many did not expect to see. The same mouths that spoke with confidence are starting to contradict themselves. The same people who presented themselves as victims are leaving patterns in other relationships. The same ones who called you difficult are now being difficult in places where you are not even present. This is how God often clears a name without turning you into a prosecutor. He lets character testify over time. He lets hidden motives trip over repeated behavior. He lets the fruit become visible in season. You wanted one dramatic moment where everyone realized the truth at once, but God often works through accumulation. One detail here, one inconsistency there, one witness who finally remembers, one person who says something never felt right about that story. It may not happen as loudly as the lie spread, but truth has a different weight. Lies need maintenance. Truth can stand alone. And when God is the one defending you, he is not rushed by the panic of people who depended on your silence, staying permanent. Still, there is a danger in the season of exposure, and you need to hear it clearly. When the truth begins to surface, the heart can secretly crave the collapse of those who harmed it. That craving is understandable, but it is not safe to feed. Divine justice is not the same as personal satisfaction. God can vindicate you without making you cruel. He can reveal what was hidden without requiring you to celebrate someone else's unraveling. This is where the chosen one must be refined again, because vindication can test the soul as much as betrayal did. When you were buried, your test was endurance. When the truth rises, your test is humility. Will you let God clear your name without turning your pain into a throne? Will you resist the urge to become the very voice that once wounded you? It is possible to tell the truth and still carry a spirit of revenge. It is possible to be right and still become spiritually unclean in the way you handle being right. God is not only interested in proving them wrong, he is shaping whether you can be trusted with influence, peace, and authority after the storm. The people who lied may have exposed their character, but your response is exposing yours. That does not mean you must pretend nothing happened. It does not mean you must protect abusers, flatter manipulators, or call darkness light. It means you let truth be truth without adding poison to it. You speak when God releases you to speak. You stay silent when silence is protection. You document what needs to be documented. You set boundaries without apology. You stop confusing meekness with availability. There are times when the most spiritual thing you can do is not argue, but remove access. There are times when obedience looks like refusing a meeting where the other person only wants to rewrite history with your participation. God's justice is clean, even when it is severe. Human revenge always leaves residue. You have already carried enough residue from what they did. Do not carry more by letting their behavior disciple your spirit. Think about the months when nothing seemed to move. That was the part that almost broke you. Not because you stopped believing in God, but because you could not understand why he seemed so calm while your name was bleeding. You prayed for him to correct it quickly. You watched people prosper socially from a lie. You saw them gain sympathy, attention, maybe even opportunities, while you were left trying to survive the consequences of their version. That kind of delay can make obedience feel like abandonment. But God's timing is not passive. It is surgical. A surgeon does not rush because the wound is dramatic. He moves according to what must be removed, repaired, and preserved. In that waiting season, God was not only dealing with them, he was dealing with your dependence on being understood. He was confronting the part of you that needed immediate approval in order to feel safe. He was teaching you how to stand when applause disappears, how to pray when your emotions accuse heaven of being late, how to keep your hands clean when nobody would blame you for getting dirty. Leave a comment with one honest answer. What has God asked you to stop defending so he could teach you to trust his defense. That question matters because not every defense is faithfulness. Sometimes constant explaining becomes a chain. Sometimes the desire to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you becomes its own prison. You may have had evidence, screenshots, witnesses, dates, context, and still felt the Holy Spirit say, "Not yet." That "not yet" did not mean never. It meant the moment was not clean enough, the audience was not ready enough, or your heart was not free enough to speak without being consumed. There are words that become powerful only after silence has matured them. There are truths that must ripen before they are released. And there are seasons when God hides your evidence, not because it is weak, but because he is building a case larger than your immediate relief. When truth comes too early, people call it defense. When truth comes in God's timing, people recognize it as revelation. A counterexample is important here because not every conflict is persecution, and not every uncomfortable correction is an attack from the enemy. Sometimes people accuse because they are malicious, but sometimes people confront because something genuinely needs to change. Spiritual maturity requires the courage to know the difference. The chosen path does not give anyone permission to avoid accountability by calling every critic jealous or every disagreement warfare. That would be pride-wearing spiritual language. If God is vindicating you, he is also purifying you. He can expose lies spoken against you while still showing you places where pain made you defensive, where fear made you controlling, where past wounds made you misread someone's tone. This does not excuse what they did. Falsehood is still falsehood. Betrayal is still betrayal. But God's justice is deep enough to defend you and correct you in the same season. That is how you know his hand is truly involved. He does not flatter the chosen. He forms them. He does not simply rescue you from enemies. He rescues you from the version of yourself that enemies could provoke into bondage. So be careful when the truth starts emerging. Do not assume every returning person has pure repentance, and do not assume every distant person is an enemy. Watch fruit. Listen for ownership. Pay attention to whether someone says, "I am sorry you felt hurt," or whether they say, "I sinned against you, and I understand why trust is broken." Those are different spirits. One protects image, the other begins repair. Also, pay attention to your own body. Peace is not always excitement. Sometimes peace feels like no longer needing the room to understand you. Sometimes healing looks like hearing your name cleared and realizing you no longer want the place back that rejected you. That realization can be unsettling. You may have wanted restoration for so long, only to discover that the version of you who needed it has died in the hidden place. God did not just bring truth to the surface, he changed what truth would mean to you when it arrived. You are not being returned to the old table as proof of worth. You are being taught to stop confusing access with honor. The exposure of their true face may not look like lightning splitting the sky. It may look quieter, more ordinary, and more undeniable. A person who lied about you may begin treating others the same way, and suddenly people see the pattern without you saying a word. Someone who manipulated sympathy may overplay the role until the performance becomes obvious. A person who painted you as the problem may carry the same chaos into a new circle where your absence can no longer be blamed. This is often how God reveals truth, not through spectacle, but through repetition. Character eventually repeats itself. Motives eventually leak. A false story eventually becomes too heavy for the liar to carry consistently. And while that happens, God is asking you to remain steady, not because steadiness changes the past, but because it proves you are no longer governed by it. The cinematic part of this season is not that enemies fall while you rise in some dramatic scene. The deeper beauty is that you become free without needing to watch every consequence unfold. You begin sleeping again. You stop checking who believes what. You stop rehearsing the perfect speech in the shower. You stop living as if the court of public opinion is the throne of God. There will still be scars. Do not let anyone shame you for that. Healing does not mean the memory becomes painless overnight. It means the memory no longer controls the direction of your obedience. You can remember and still move. You can grieve and still discern. You can forgive and still refuse access. You can be vindicated and still choose a quiet life. This is the rise from darkness into light, not a rise built on applause, but one built on clarity. You know now that God can protect you, even when people misread the protection as isolation. You know now that a delay is not always denial. You know now that the burial place was not strong enough to hold what God had planted. And maybe the most powerful evidence of all is not that they are being exposed. It is that you are not the same person they tried to bury. So when the truth comes out, let it find you sober. Let it find you with clean hands, not perfect hands, but surrendered ones. Let it find you less hungry for validation than you used to be. Let it find you able to say, God saw it, without needing to narrate every wound for people who only became interested once the evidence was undeniable. Some will return because they are sorry. Some will return because the crowd changed direction. Some will return because they need relief from guilt. Discern the difference. God may ask you to receive an apology without reopening the door. He may ask you to speak plainly where you once stayed silent. He may ask you to bless someone from a distance and keep walking. None of that is weakness. It is the authority of a person who survived spiritual pressure without letting it rewrite their soul. The ones who tried to bury you thought the darkness would erase you, but darkness does not erase what God has named. It only reveals what can still breathe without public light. You learned to breathe there. You learned to pray there. You learned that heaven does not become absent just because people become loud. And now, as facts rise and masks slip, you do not have to chase the moment. You do not have to dramatize the exposure. You do not have to become the echo of the chaos that formed around you. Stand where God places you. Say only what obedience requires. Let the rest speak through time, through fruit, through patterns no one can keep hiding. The truth did not arrive late because God was unsure. It arrived when the soil had done its work, when the grave had become a witness, when the hands that covered you could no longer explain why something buried kept growing.